Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. So we're going to do a research literature review right here from the Goolsby residence.
Let's do it. It's the Goolsby recording studio.
Yeah. Well, it is quite pleasant out here. Don't have any bugs on me or anything. That might become relevant here in a minute.
Yeah, are you enjoying having some reasonable weather compared to Central Florida?
Yeah, it's a little bit cooler. I like it. Feels like a turkey ought to be gobbling.
Ooh. They have been, but I feel like, well, I didn't, neither of us, well, you went this morning, but not here. I don't know how y'all's weather was, but it was perfect here this morning. But, work calls, and I've been in the turkey woods all week already, so figured I probably should get in the office and do a little bit of something today since we're going to be going again the next 2 days.
Yeah. Well, it was a pretty morning this morning down where I was too. And, matter of fact, I was contemplating some of the stuff that we're talking about today in this episode just this morning while I was sitting out there and the turkeys weren't gobbling. And I don't know why. There were clearly turkeys around. We saw a bunch. We heard a bunch a couple mornings ago close by where we were at. We did hear one bird gobble a few times, but they just, for whatever reason, were not super vocal this morning, even though I know there was a lot of birds around. But I started wondering what it was. It was literally, with the Chuck Wills widow in particular, it was deafening where we were at. And I can remember that when I was a kid, and I can remember it in two other places I've hunted that were open forests that were frequently burned. And that's where I was this morning, in a landscape that was open forest, frequently burned. Absolutely beautiful landscape. Public land in Florida. And an undisclosed location otherwise.
Fair enough.
A lot of those birds that I remember hearing when I was a kid are insectivores. And, like flycatchers, and, a lot of people hear these birds or did and can probably appreciate what I'm talking about. But I was thinking about something that has been sent to me a few times, various different ways. There was a pretty cool video that someone shared with me where some guy apparently drove the same route for 30 years or something, and he counted all the bugs on his windshield. Did you see that?
No. So I've heard a lot of people talking about, I don't have as many bugs on my windshield and my grill and all that stuff anymore. But I've never come across somebody who has actually quantified that.
Well, there's a couple of peer-reviewed publications where somebody literally standardized a window survey or something. Isn't that cool? That's dedication.
I'm just thinking about, trying to develop a methodology for that, and thinking about, you have to have the same speed, and then you have to have the same car because it's got the same aerodynamics, and then all the variables that would be at play with that. That's dedication.
It is. But I think that, it does feel to me, and I notice it particularly when I go back home,
Mm-hmm.
when I go home to where my family's land is, it's still very rural. I mean, there's literally no development other than some camp houses and, a little bit of cattle land. It's otherwise woods and undeveloped. And when I go there and we have the porch light on, I mean, it's just swarming with bugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember when I was a kid always, playing around the light at night and catching different kinds of bugs and
Mm-hmm.
looking at them and stuff. And now it's pretty rare. And it's just like sticks out to me like a sore thumb every time I go down there
Oh,
because
I
I
remember
don't
the
see
same
that.
thing. Yeah. I mean,
I don't.
I think back to growing up as a kid in South Alabama and then later on in Georgia. But I mean, like we had a porch light, and then my dad had a shop out behind the house that had a big light on it too. And you know how, like you were describing, all the insects congregate around it. And I can remember
Yeah.
toads would hang out in the light too because all the
Oh
insects had
yeah.
drawn them in.
Well, on at my camp, it's the green tree frogs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a video of it somewhere. There's like 25 of them, and I've got my daughter there, and she's just so intrigued because the frogs are all gathering around the light and catching all these bugs.
Yeah.
So, but there's been some concern. I think we've touched on a little bit on here before. There's been concern over insect declines,
Yeah.
uh, and I know that you've dug around in the literature, and I have too, on this topic because I do think it's something worthy of talking about turkeys, given that they eat a lot of insects. And we also have had several researchers and studies identify poult, the poult life stage as being sort of a bottleneck in populations. Really commonly, poult rearing cover is relatively poor and sparse on the landscape. And at that life stage, they're pretty much 100% dependent on insects.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think it was worthwhile to dig around in that literature, and I did find some things. I'm
Yeah.
sure you did too. I know one of the things that I found is there's an intense debate,
Yeah. Absolutely.
right?
I had no idea how intense the debate was in the field of entomology over this until I mean, it didn't take long. It was about 5 minutes into starting my lit review that I discovered it.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like for you to talk about what you found. Just to really grossly summarize that debate, it sounds like to me there have been several sort of key papers that have shown a fairly stark decline over the recent past in insect abundance and
Yeah.
diversity and other metrics, richness, evenness, whatever different kinds of things that they were, and in some cases, loss of species entirely or even guilds.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be really focused in European countries where those
That's what I was going to
magnitudes are.
say too. That was the other
Yeah,
thing that I immediately noticed is that the state of knowledge on this whole issue and the amount of time that they've been paying attention to it is much longer for Europe
hmm
than it is for North America.
yeah. That I kind of gathered, but there is some North American data.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's kind of hard to summarize because there's positives and negatives, and I think the one long term research paper that we were looking at is pretty dense, but it's a really big, huge, data sets, comprehensive over a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So for the
And there's a
audience, you
bunch
may,
of them that, because we're obviously talking about this within the context of turkeys, and there's a lot of those papers that focus on species of insects that turkeys don't use too. So
right,
it can
like
be
they may
really
be,
difficult to pull all this out.
yeah, I mean, they may be aerial, they may be aquatic insects. I saw several things on that,
Yeah.
arboreal,
Yep.
so it's really hard to interpret some of it, and there's a lot of debate. So there's like countering arguments, but that long term ecological research paper, which for the audience, that you may not know it, we have many sites that have had long-term funding, and to qualify for this, and maybe if you know better, tell me, but I think that you have to have 5 continuous years of data collection on a site to even apply for the funding to become a long-term ecological research site.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, but that's interesting.
It's definitely, you have to have years of data continuous, and then you can apply for it, and it sort of supports it to be a long-term ecological research site. And those sites, they're all over the country, and they have started really doing well stacking data sets that are long-term. So when I say that, I mean they have intensive information on a variety of taxa, soils, nutrient, the weather patterns, like all kinds of stuff. And there was one that was focused on insects, and their kind of take-home messages that in North America there wasn't a net decline in the abundance of insects. However, there were some insects that were declining, and other ones that were, that were more abundant now.
And you and I are very familiar with that within the context of wildlife species, and particularly birds in general, not just turkeys. But we've definitely seen a shift in species representation of songbirds across the landscape.
Well, that's
with
kind of
more
what
generalist, more generalist
Yeah.
and late successional species, having a upwards trajectory, whereas the ones that have more of an early successional association are in the greatest decline in many areas.
That's right. And that's kind of what I was describing this morning when it, like, I don't remember the Chuck Will's widows being so abundant and so loud that it was literally deafening. Like, it's almost irritating because you can't hear the turkeys gobbling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just,
it's kind of like that at our forestry education center down in South Alabama, the Dixon Center.
yeah.
It's in Andalusia, right down there on the Florida line, and we go, stay out there. I stay out there for 2 weeks a year when I'm teaching down there in our summer practicum course, and they're just screaming. The Chuck Will's widows are just screaming at night.
I'm pretty sure they wake the turkeys up. That's the reason the turkeys wake up, because they get going like right when you expect them to wake up and start gobbling.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's just sort of resonated with me thinking about that. And speaking of birds, I started. There's a lot of debate with insects, whether or not there's declines and the spatiotemporal extent of that and magnitude and where it is, all that stuff. But I didn't find that argument with wildlife. Did you?
Which specific one?
Did you find an intense argument where it's really going back and forth like the insect stuff is?
No, I didn't.
Well, this is the thing that stuck out to me. And whenever I told you I wanted to talk about this, it was because I uncovered this paper. And there were some things in the paper that kind of shocked me when I read it. So let me see what the title is so Charlotte can help us. Which, by the way, we got to hand it to Charlotte. Somehow she made this thing into something that sounded good enough that we won a new award. I don't think we announced that, did we, on the podcast?
No, we had. I think this is the first time we recorded since we found out about it.
Yeah. So we won another award for the podcast.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
And I'm glad for this one that Charlotte was also recognized for it.
Yes, that was pretty special. I appreciated that as well. So the 3 of us were recognized by the Association of Natural Resource Extension Professionals.
There it is. Also known as ANREP.
Yeah, so this is a national award that we got for basically technological communication through podcasting. Got a gold award. So, I see you brushing your shoulders off. Or did you just spill some cookies?
No, there was a little dust on the bed here that I'm sitting on.
Yeah,
By the way, Marcus is currently on my screen porch. I'm sitting on the bed. The kids are in the middle of the house, and we're trying to, keep them quiet, and the dog's in
yeah.
there too. So,
And the
yeah.
turkeys are gobbling. So this is
Oh man.
dedication. If y'all don't appreciate this right now, you know. But I mean, seriously, you know, Charlotte has been just a phenomenal supporter and producer of the show. But also Turkeys for Tomorrow, uh,
Hmm.
they've been with us from the start, helped us get this thing off the ground and supported it. So appreciate that. But yeah, the audience, our feedback. I mean, it's starting to catch up where I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed, even with some of the back. We're getting backed up on.
Yeah, and it's always during turkey season is when
Oh
when it
yeah, yeah.
peaks, and
So
I was actually sitting in the turkey woods earlier this week, and I'm sure we might talk about that a little bit at the end of the show today, but I was trying to answer a listener's question, and a gobbler that had been silent for a while fired off, and so
you're in there sending
I
a
don't
message to a listener.
I
That's
don't yeah.
that's pretty impressive right there.
I don't remember who it was that I was messaging back, but if I messaged you back over the course of this week, you may have almost made me mess up a gobbler. But
You're welcome.
that doesn't mean quit sending me message. We love it, and it's my
Yeah,
fault for
yeah,
being
yeah,
on my stupid phone when I'm in the
yeah.
turkey woods. But
Well, I mean, I really am celebrating the audience feedback has
absolutely,
been just tremendous, and the support and everybody sharing their stuff everywhere. I mean, it really has been pretty special, and it's nice to be recognized for that. We're not doing it for that, but people, our colleagues are recognizing this is impactful, and
well,
I did want
yeah,
to share with the audience how impactful it
yeah.
was.
And the thing that it represents for me is because this does doing this does take away a lot of our time that would otherwise be allocated to other aspects of our job. And I know
Hmm.
that's this is more in line with your expectations at work than mine, but especially for me, it's good affirmation that it's still the right thing to do,
Yeah,
because
you're not
at the
necessarily
bottom of
getting paid
this,
to do that,
yes,
but
at
it
the
is the
bottom of
right thing
this,
to
it
do.
is the right thing to do, and that's why we did it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And my university recognized the importance of it. I mean, I put a survey, overwhelming response, and the university realized how impactful a lot of what we were doing was, and they changed
Yeah,
my appointment to better reflect it, to
yeah.
take the reins off and let me go. So
And
I,
I will
yeah,
say as well, to my dean's credit, that even though this doesn't necessarily fall directly in line with my research and teaching responsibilities, he appreciates it. I mean, he told me,
yeah,
recently that he does, and he
yeah,
recognizes its value.
yeah. So, so that we don't tease the audience any longer, we have a survey. You can still take it if you want to. Please do. We love getting the feedback on topics, and also it's helping us measure impact. But so far on the survey that we've been putting in the show notes each week, we have tallied up the acreage of what people say they're applying the knowledge from the podcast and our programming to the management of acreage for turkeys, and it totals up to almost 2.5 million acres already.
Yeah, it was about 2.3 something.
Yeah, it's over 2.4 now. Last I looked
Yeah,
at it, that's
that's
pretty incredible,
unbelievable. Yeah,
and hopefully that is going to start moving the needle with turkeys, because I think
yeah.
we have some concerns.
And
So
and to be clear too, there were some public land managers that replied that were managing a few thousand acres and stuff like that, but there were lots of 150s, 50,
oh yeah,
27,
tons of them.
350. Yeah, just
I
that just
think,
added up.
and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 50% private landowners.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was almost exactly 50%, which I think is what we were saying.
Yeah.
But we did confirm that. So if you haven't taken the survey, take a minute to help us, quantify the impact. It helps us, to justify the effort. And it's working because
And
now,
to learn more about what we can do better.
yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Like we have a lot of topics in there, and we're already covering some of them.
Yes.
That people put articulated in there. We're sort of grouping by topic area, and it's helping us, to help get good information to people that they want.
And it's relevant to them.
But all that to say, we got on that sidebar there for a minute. We have some concerns, particularly we've kind of set this up as concerns about poults that are dependent on insects. We've talked about various aspects of that, and I got to this wildlife paper, and there was something striking to me. They basically, in this paper, again, I was going to go find what the name of the paper was for Charlotte, and that's how we got on the stat trap. Sorry, Charlotte. Also, Charlotte, you can cut out this pause.
Please don't, Charlotte.
Yeah, I'm trying to allow Will to do some math real quick, and he's counting. He's counting in cookies right now in the bed. Do you have britches on?
you know how my son is. How I know for sure that my son is my own.
How's that?
He's gotten into this phase lately, and I don't even know what's provoking it, but I'm trying to get to the root of it and figure out where it came from. But now when we ride by a building that he knows, like he's 4 now, and he can recognize buildings that are schools.
Mm-hmm.
And some like the other day he started this thing where every now and then we'll ride by one. And he goes, "Do they do math at that school?" So apparently he's definitely kin to me.
Yeah. I don't know if I can go there. They do math over there.
I just want to stick with shapes and colors.
Yeah. Well, so this back to this paper. So this paper was published in 2021, so it's pretty recent. In Ornithological Applications by, here we go again, Talamy and Shriver. Pretty sure I got those right.
Sounds reasonable.
If you just look at the words, it's Tall Amy and Shriver. But
okay.
Anyhow, they wrote this paper called "Are Declines in Insects and Insectivorous Birds Related?" And I thought, what are they classifying as an insectivorous bird? So essentially what they did, they reviewed all the literature that they could find on this topic, and they grouped birds based on whether or not they include insects in their diet in any part of their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And compared that to birds that did not include insects at any part, even when they're feeding young. So after reviewing that literature, there's several cool things, and we'll put this in the show notes, but they looked at this over a 50-year period. And terrestrial birds for which insects, I'm reading straight from the paper, terrestrial birds for which insects are an essential source of food have declined by 2.9 billion individuals over the last 50 years.
Wow.
While terrestrial birds that do not depend on insects during their life history have gained 26 million individuals.
Mm-hmm.
There's 111-fold, not 111%, 111 times difference between those two.
That's shocking.
So this does, they were kind of asking the question, okay, if there's some debate over this insect decline, but there's mostly agreement that there are some insect declines in some places of some taxa. the debate really is what is the magnitude, and is it ubiquitous, and are there places that are increasing, all that sort of stuff. But I would say that generally insect declines are likely, especially in taxa that matter to turkeys. And when I saw that, that was a review of all the literature on the topic.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to be 111 times difference between those two categories, I was blown away by that.
Yeah. For good reason.
So,
I dug into this too, and I think I took a little bit, as we discussed earlier, a little bit different path than you. And one of the things that is interesting to me about the whole situation, because you read, as I'm sure you did, as you get into these papers, one of the things that is cited more often than anything else is the intensification of agriculture and the role that has played in
mm-hmm.
insect declines, right? And
Yep.
so, like with the results that you just cited, my question then becomes, well, is the insect decline approximate or an ultimate cause of what is going on with the insectivorous birds, or the birds that use insects at a part of their life stage like turkeys do?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously turkeys eat insects throughout their life,
Yeah.
but it's 90% of the diet during the poult stage, which we've
Yeah.
identified as a bottleneck.
Well, and to be clear, what is it? 96% of North American terrestrial birds use insects during rearing of young.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah, of the terrestrial species.
Yeah. So, as a result of that, I got into some habitat stuff.
Of course you did. I did
Of
that
course.
too, actually, but
Of
go ahead.
course. Of course I did, and you probably read some of the same stuff that I did.
Well, and I kind of highlighted up front that whole situation while I was sitting out there pondering this, trying to hear a turkey gobble.
Yeah. But, when you hear about, when you read rather about the insect decline being tied to intensification of agriculture, several things come up after that. And one of those is the increased use of pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. And are those things directly impacting the insects, which in turn impacts the birds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not dismissing or diminishing the role that those factors potentially play, but you and I have talked about intensification of agriculture in reference to turkeys quite a bit. And in that scenario, I'm less concerned about, maybe some of those synthetic chemicals that are being applied, and I'm more concerned about the habitat change that is
Mm-hmm.
associated with that. And what's interesting is this has been a problem, as we covered earlier, in Europe or it's been at least identified as a problem and studied as one in Europe for much longer than it has in the
Mm-hmm.
US. And as a result of that, they've been coming up with various practices to try to mitigate the habitat loss for insects, particularly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those practices that has been very extensively studied throughout the literature, I mean, I found page after page when I searched on this topic, is planting wildflower strips in agricultural areas.
You know what? Can you just imagine? Imagine the agricultural field with a beautiful prairie flower, garden right along it in
I
that
know.
strip.
Yeah, and in some of them, they're putting multiple strips throughout the field that are, spaced different distances apart, like
Mm-hmm.
60 meters apart or something like that, because they've studied, the distance from each of these strips where insect populations benefit. Like, how far away do you have
Yeah.
to get before the benefit is no longer
When
observable?
and maybe you're going to get into this, or maybe not. I don't know, but I have a little bit of experience in this realm,
Hmm.
and there's a couple of really interesting things about those filter strips. When you think about in agriculture, you don't necessarily want more bugs. You want less bad bugs, but
More
more
good
good
ones.
bugs,
Yeah,
right?
you want the
Like for
pollinators, and
yeah,
you want the ones that
The
that
predators
predate.
of yeah,
They're predators on the bad insects.
yes, exactly. And are you going to get into the how those things change?
No, I wasn't planning on it.
Well, a lot of the predators of the bad stuff are also eaten by turkeys. Just FYI.
Hmm. Yeah,
Some of the
like insect
pollinators too.
or like insects, like spiders, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I wanted to discuss briefly a few papers, and starting with insects, and then transitioning to the effects of the same practices on birds specifically to tie it back and make it more relevant to turkeys. And the first
Hmm.
one that I came across was by Haaland and others, 2011. So that's Haaland, and they did a review of studies of insect diversity and abundance in wildflower strips in agricultural fields in Europe. And they found that overall, they reported that in a significant majority of studies, sown wildflower strips support higher insect abundance and diversity than crops. No big surprise, right? Like
Hmm.
if you go from an expansive area that has one species of plant to, diversifying that by implanting other species of plants, you're going to diversify that simply because you're providing more food and cover for species that have different requirements, right?
Hmm.
So that in and of itself is not that surprising. But you go to the other papers and they extended the same practice out to birds. And so the first one that I wanted to talk about is Schmidt et al. 2022, so a very recent paper. And they were
Hmm.
looking at breeding birds in Germany. And in this paper, it was a nice experimental design where they went out and they established perennial wildflower strips with native, drumroll please, 4 mixtures. So
Golly.
each of these mixtures had 30 species of forbs, and we talk
All coming back, isn't it?
and there's the old F
Full
word,
circle.
right? The
Hey,
F
if you
word
would
on
like to
turkey
know,
science is forb.
yeah, forb comes up so often, and I get asked about it quite frequently that we made a video on what a forb is. If you want,
Yeah,
we'll
that's
put it in
right.
the show notes.
So, forb is just our word for wildflower, basically. But they reported many things, but the one that really stood out to me was that fields with wildflower strips had higher species richness and density of birds compared to controls that did not have the wildflower strips. And they found that forb rich vegetation was the main driver promoting birds. And keep in mind that, we talk about forbs all the time in the context of turkeys, but this is showing that, this is a category of plants that's beneficial across a diversity of species of birds.
Hmm.
And to me, it further emphasizes and drives home that point of how important these plants are for turkeys.
There's no question about that. It is. We can't say it enough. I think was it on Gamekeepers recently that we were on when I was talking about I worked with a landowner that was really interested in birds, and she started putting in these wildflower patches, and the bird response was just incredible. But she's looking at indigo bunnings and all that, all these beautiful ornate birds that were
Hmm.
using it extensively at very high abundance relative to what she was accustomed to on her place. And I was sitting there thinking, man, this is an awesome place for a brood. Like I'm sitting there thinking
Hmm.
about turkeys, and she's like, "Oh, look at that bird! Look at this bird!"
Yeah.
But she's implemented all over the place because she loves birds and likes to see them, and the flowers themselves are pretty.
Yeah.
But the structure in it and the bugs jumping around in it was just incredible, and I just could not think of anything other than how good those those four dominated areas were.
Yeah, no doubt. So this is my final paper, and I have to read through these key points here because they were not written by me, believe it or not, but they echo so much of what has been said on this show. And so this paper was by Blösch et al. 2023. So just came out last
How
year.
do you spell blush?
It's just like Bosch, like power tools, but with a L between the B and the O.
Okay,
I mean, that's how I'd say it. Is that not how you say it? Maybe
blush.
Blösch. Blösch. All right.
Blösch?
Probably it.
Is there an
Probably
E
is.
on there?
It's
No.
European, so I'm from Alabama. Come on, man. All right, listen to this. Ground breeding farmland birds are disproportionately negatively affected by the impact of agricultural intensification and are dramatically declining in Europe. A key factor for the decline of ground breeding farmland birds is the lack of suitable nesting sites, which do not allow sufficient breeding productivity to stabilize populations. The decline of birds in agriculture has been greater than in any other cover type, but we found that wildflower strips provide suitable nesting sites and food that are currently missing in agricultural areas. It just sounds so much like the same problem that we're currently facing with turkeys declining in certain areas, but the fact that it applies to such a broad array and diversity of different species of songbirds, just for me is further confirmation that this is a habitat problem.
Yeah, I'm with you. Uh, the group globally of birds that are most in decline, I guess. I don't know what the right word is because I don't remember from the paper, but the most imperiled are the grassland and early succession obligates or assisted species, but especially
Right.
obligates.
Yeah.
And turkeys certainly fall into the assisted category for that. And I mean, maybe even obligate.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Seasonally obligate.
yeah, for a life stage. I mean, I would
Right.
classify that. They definitely do much better in that situation when they have high quality uh, herbaceous dominated understories or grassland or prairie
Yeah.
available.
Right.
So, or old field certainly can provide the structure and everything. But that what you were talking about. One thing I didn't mention about the paper earlier. We had this. I said that there was this asymmetrical decline, right, where you have 111-fold decline or relative decline in the insectivorous birds. And just to put that into perspective for you, remember the non-insectivorous birds increased in abundance, but if you add them all together, we've still had a decline over the last 50 years in North America in birds. We've still, like, if you add them all together, uh, have a decline in the number of individual birds of approximately one third, 33%.
Yeah.
So that just is another way to emphasize
Yeah.
that the insect thing might be pretty key in this whole thing, and the insect thing is connected to habitat in
Absolutely. That
particular.
was my point. That was my
And
take
if
home. And these are
yeah,
species that are not hunted. So we know that hunting is not the factor that's driving it for these other
right,
species. These are species that are still, subject to predation, but in a lot of cases, different suites of predators than turkeys
yeah,
are.
but a lot of
Um,
them to the same predators, like
and yeah,
literally the identical predators, almost the identical
right,
suite.
right. And so, I mean, it just fundamentally at its core, it just still, of course, it brings me right back to that habitat problem.
Well, and then you uncovered some stuff, and there's other things like this, and particularly diverse forelands have high insect abundance, high
Who'd have thunk it?
diversity of them.
Yeah,
And when thinned and burned forest or adding strips in your agriculture, I mean, those things are increasing availability of insects for
well, that's
things that eat
something that
them.
I'm glad you brought up because I meant to mention it earlier. But let's say that you're not in a primarily, like an ag dominated landscape, you're in a forest dominated landscape, same problem, right?
Hmm.
Anytime you lose diversity, if you've got a pine monoculture, or even if you've got a mixed hardwood stand, but it's closed canopy, so there's not diversity within the understory, it's effectively the same thing that's happening there as is happening in the ag fields that are dominated by a single species of crop.
Yep. Yeah, and I think you said a key thing. the understory diversity in particular for turkeys, but
Mm-hmm.
you could also kind of think about it as a diversity of structure, I guess is
Yeah.
the word I'm looking for, because you have a developed understory, right? You have basically an absent midstory. To think about plants that are taller than you, but not catching full sunlight or partial sunlight. And then you have a broken canopy, where the overstory is broken, where it's allowing lots of penetration of light to the forest floor. And we just
Mm-hmm.
talked about it with Mark Turner. He was describing, those thin forests that they were burning and how much turkeys like it, especially when it's high quality brooding cover right after fire.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I'm with you. When you start to look at the overall bird declines and it being it seems to be really connected to things that eat insects,
Yeah.
and they're connected to particular types of vegetation that are basically absent from the landscape, or at least have declined in abundance, connectivity, or quality substantially.
Yeah.
And a lot of those species aren't even hunted or.
Well, I mean, certainly, like in Europe, I mean, they're not facing the same. I mean, I'm sure they
Yeah.
have predator issues of their
Oh, yeah, the
own, but it's
predators.
completely different species. And I mean, I think about too that a lot of the European landscape has been altered by human modification for a much longer history than the American one has. But those practices oftentimes are the same ones that are passed along, and they
Mm-hmm.
trickle down and they're implemented eventually here as they have been there. And so the way that I think about this is that they're seeing evidence of those practices, particularly like in the Blösch or Blösch study, however you want to say it. They're particularly impactful to ground nesting farmland birds, and that's exactly what I think of when I think of a turkey. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be around a farm, but they oftentimes have been associated with farms historically, and it just makes sense that they're documenting the same thing there, and that it's probably more profound because it's been playing out over a longer duration of time. So it can kind of be, it's almost somewhat of a projection of what we can expect if we don't alter some of those practices, as they're starting to try to do there.
Mm-hmm. Thin, burn,
And you don't
just.
have to. Another point I wanted to make sure we made, and we have other episodes talking about this, particularly the ones with Dr. Harper from University of Tennessee. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to plant the wildflower strips like they did in those studies.
Yeah,
There's ways that
he
we
has a.
can care for the native seed bank and stimulate the native seed bank and get a lot of those native ecotypes and those native species of plants to grow without
Yeah.
that additional expense. And I think, in fact, in one study, he showed that it was like 25% of the cost to naturally revegetate an
Yes.
area compared to
I.
planting it.
If you guys want a summary of, I made a post about this when a paper came out. It's basically a poult from, I think Tess Jolly took the picture, beautiful picture of a poult. That's the cover image of it. But I covered this study from Harper's lab because that's exactly what they showed.
Hmm.
That you can manage, like they were converting in this study fescue back into native communities, old field plant communities, and they showed that it was just as effective in terms of the habitat quality to not plant anything
Right.
as it was to plant stuff. Both were,
Yeah.
killing the grass was the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Next was, making sure there was a diversity of forb cover in it. Not that there isn't any grass, but it was dominated by forbs, and that could be achieved just through, disking and burning and selective use of herbicides after you kill that grass, or by planting. It just
Yep.
costs way more to get
Yep.
it through planting. But I will also say, uh, there are opportunities in some places to have programs, but that are focused on these kinds of practices. So you could potentially get a cost share or some sort of offset to that cost through some of these programs. So
Hmm.
I definitely we have a lot of farm bill biologists kind of a catch-all term for people that work in those kinds of landscapes, but a lot of them work with these kinds of programs and helping connect landowners to it. So I'm sure you have something like that wherever you're listening from.
Absolutely.
So you may have opportunity to to offset some of the costs with any of these practices.
Well, good stuff. You ready to go kill a turkey?
I'm kind of getting that way. You know, I mean, I got a little bit fired up right here.
Yeah,
You
I
know
know.
what? There's a couple of things that seriously that I'm excited about. One of them is proximate. We're going to go get a turkey in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing I'm pretty excited about is we're going to have a big cicada hatch, a bunch of broods hatching this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited for several reasons. One, I'm kind of expecting turkeys to do well, particularly with poult rearing.
And it seems like in a lot of areas we've had a couple of good hatches in the southeast over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
And if we can layer a third on top of that, the cicadas help us out with a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, that's exciting.
Yeah, and some of the state agency folks that are listening have shared some information about cicada hatches in their states where it seems to have a pretty big effect
Mm-hmm.
locally on turkey. So we're going to have a big hatch. I'm also pretty excited because we have all the cicada hatch data. So I really, maybe if some of the folks out there that are state agency folks have access to the state data and they're willing to provide that, we could try to quantify the role that cicadas are having. But I think it also will be pretty telling about how important this insect issue is.
Yeah. That
If we
would be a
see
really cool paper if we could compile that data and
yeah,
publish a paper on the link between turkey populations and cicadas.
right. Well, I think what it tells you though, if you see an explosion in turkey reproduction as an outcome of an explosion in insect abundance, then that tells me insects are probably limiting.
Yeah, they're a limiting in a normal year, a
Yeah.
non-hatch year.
Yeah, so they're a limiting factor, and you've relaxed that limiting factor, and then you see turkey abundance. Now, there are some competing hypotheses, like it could be satiating predators that switch with turkeys or
Right,
something. But
right.
we actually have some ideas on how to cleverly detangle those things.
Mm.
So we'll leave it at that for now. But I'm pretty excited because I think if we see that bump, it will tell us, okay, this is, insects might be a mechanism and they're linked to habitat, and a lot of the stuff that we're preaching might really move the needle a lot.
I sure
If
hope it
we,
does.
if we can get a lot more habitat on the ground that produces a lot more insects,
Yeah,
and we get more turkeys.
then we get to hear more gobbles. And I've heard a good many this week already, but I heard them, as a guide and not as a hunter. And
Yeah, so did
um,
I.
I got to I got to help out with the Alabama governor's one shot hunt this week, and I had a really good time. That's a great event. It raises some money, and it also, I think, very importantly, brings a lot of passionate turkey hunters together, for a couple of days to the same place to talk about the issues, that turkeys are facing. And many of them are leaders in the state that can potentially help out with, organizing efforts to try to improve that situation. So
Hmm.
I really enjoyed getting to be a part of that.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in that, but I did get to take a new turkey hunter, not new to hunting explicitly, but new turkey hunter. And we got all over the birds and just haven't quite closed the deal. But man, it was a lot of fun getting out in
Hmm.
the woods and chasing them, seeing the excitement, feeling it. I had to put a plug in my left ear because of the Chuck Will's widow, but you know,
Well, maybe you'll have to put a plug in your ear tomorrow for all the gobbling that we're going to hear.
yeah, I sure hope so. Well, we have also, just to close this out, we have talked a couple of times about trying to get some gear together to give listeners that have taken the time to rate the podcast.
Hmm.
So we've gotten some stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we should do our first run of this. We'll start small.
And before we do that, if you're a retailer out there that has a turkey related product that you're interested in contributing, for us to give away on the podcast, just reach out to us. There's multiple ways. I'm sure y'all can figure out how to get in touch with us, and we'll work something out.
Yeah,
just let us know.
So yeah, we've gotten some things already, and we really appreciate it, and happy to have some other stuff. And if you haven't had a chance to rate the podcast, then you're not going to get this one that we're going to give away today. But go ahead and rate it, and leave us something about Will not being able to do math, and maybe you'll get selected for some of the next stuff.
Will not being able to do math, and Marcus not being able to pronounce names.
Counting in cookies. He's at the bed counting in cookies right now. So I kind of randomly went through and just selected a review.
Was it a true random process?
Well, it was relatively random, yes. So I just kind of scrolled back and forth without looking through it for a while until I had no idea whether I was in the front, back, or in the middle of the list.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
So I ended up on one. It was a positive review. It was from BM Nash 45.
BM Nash 45.
Yeah, if you're BM Nash 45, just send us a message, either email or through Instagram. We can get you connected to the product. But today, our first one that we're going to give away is from Florida Camo. Pretty cool company, really cool guy. I know the guy that started the company, and he and I have gotten along really well, and he's been really helpful.
Yeah, I saw them down at the convention. I saw their booth and I saw their camo patterns.
Yeah,
and they're perfect for blending in down there where you are.
Oh man, perfect in the low country for sure. But they gave us a couple of things, but the first thing we'll give away is a hat. So if you're BM Nash 45, reach out to us, and we'll make sure you get that hat. But thanks for rating the podcast. Thanks everybody out there for listening. Can't express enough. I mean, it's literally led us to getting accolades for it, and that's coming because of the enthusiasm and impact from the audience. So
absolutely. We
really appreciate that.
Yeah, and hopefully next week we'll have a hunting story to tell.
Oh, now. I got some hunting stories to tell.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say is we have... Yeah, I mean, I've amassed several from this season that we hadn't got a chance to talk about yet. So maybe we'll find time in the next few weeks when we're not hunting or doing our day jobs.
Well,
to do like a bonus episode on hunting stories.
Well, I was a little bit disappointed. I think I said last episode if we got 5 ratings that said you can't do math, that I'd tell my turkey story because I killed one earlier this year already. And we didn't get any. I was disappointed. So I guess we're not going to tell my turkey story.
Well, I appreciate y'all. And just keep in mind that Marcus is going to tell the story anyway, so you don't have to insult me to hear the story.
It's all in good fun, man. Hey, there's way more insulting things about me on there than there is about you.
I don't think so. All right. Sounds good.
All right, let's go get a turkey.
Let's do it. Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.